tie-dye, animal prints. We have the baggy mom jeans. What else do women wear? We have the little dip dye, bleach dye. These are all trends that are going on for women right now in the year 2020. But how was the fashion trend for women a whole entire century ago in the year 2020? In the year both 2020 and the 1920s, women were very expressive with the way they dressed and being risque. And like now, women are being risque with wearing crop tops and shorts, especially in the summertime. But in the year 2020, women were typically being risque for the first time by wearing shorter dresses than below their ankles. But we're going to get into our speech, which is about the 1920s women fashions and how it changed perceptions of what a typical woman were like. But first, we need to understand about the history leading up to the 1920s with their fashion sense, and the women's suffrage, which is about women being likely to vote, and then we can get into more about our fashion trends. I am qualified to give this speech because I have always been super fascinated by the 1920s looks, because I feel like it symbolizes more of a time for women to be expressive about who they are inside and be able to go away from the traditional values that were set for a woman, that I even made a whole dress out of bread tags for the flapper dress, and we'll get into what a flapper girl and a flapper dress is later on in the speech, but it made me super inspired that I've always been fascinated with the year 1920s looks. Alright, to understand more about why the perception of a woman changed with the year 1920, we first need to understand the eras before this 1920 era. So let's first start off with the Victorian era fashion, which is between the years 1837 to the years 1901. In this era of the Victoria era, women were the typical housewives. They didn't have very much rights. They didn't really have like any rights, They had to be that typical housewives that you see today, being who cooks and they clean. And they were kind of dominant. The males were dominant in the relationship. Now in the trends, they were all conservative. Now they were very modest. They were wearing these bulky, heavy dresses with corsets, and they were tons of layers. Then we have the Progressive era, which isn't as big of a deal to the perception of what changed between the Victorian era, but the Progressive era in terms of fashion was between the years 1897 to the 1920. Here I have a picture of the dresses looked like between the years 1910 to the 1920, but according to an article I read, and it was by Karina Reddy, and she talked about how women wore a softer silhouette that was kind of like an S-shaped ball gown. They had the first time they were able to really show their arms wearing short sleeve dresses, and they actually also had tailored dresses in this period. Now also during the Progressive era, they also had the women's suffrage movement, which was between the years 1848 to 1920, where women fought for the rights to vote, and they had marches and protests, and they had conventions where women would come together and they would just rebel from their traditional values, which actually led to the 19th Amendment, which is giving the woman the right to vote. Now, with the rights to vote, many women were more willing to rebel that they had with their fashion sense. So, this leads into the Roaring 20s. What is the Roaring 20s? The Roaring 20s is full of a period of glitz and glam and breaking from traditional value, with women wearing shorter dresses. So we have the flapper girl, as I mentioned earlier. Now, a flapper girl, according to Suhan Park in the article Academy Works, is a new breed of young woman in the middle income bracket who preferred the flapper look, characterized by bob cut hairs, a low waistline, and short skirts. And they also had to wear, so they had shorter skirts. And then they were also really big into wearing beads and feathers. You have something called the flapper headband, which consists of it's a headband that went across your forehead, and it was full of beads, and they had feather on the side. And then they also missed in this period, and this was also after World War I ended, which was in the year 1918. People were looking for something leisurely to do, where they had sports, and a lot of women would participate in tennis, golf, and swimming. But the women were more likely interested in what they were wearing. Here in this picture, you see a woman wearing a sweater vest and a long skirt and sports. And what this an article I read on womensportshistory.org said sports required elaborate outfits. They had an assurance of femininity on competitors in costume. So we had women breaking from the traditional value, and they had the flapper dresses, they had the shorter outfits, and it's definitely unheard of, which was changed perception of what the Victorian era was. When the Victorian era was when the women would wear bulky, long, heavy dresses, into more of a risque with the bobby haircut and the short dresses. Now let's give an overview of our article. An overview was that women were changing the looks after they had the right to vote, and they really rebelled from the perception of what they used to with the bulky dresses to where they are now. In conclusion, I'm going to give you a quote from The Great Gatsby, which says, "It's never too late to be whoever you want to be," by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I believe this is accurate in the 1920s because women were not afraid to be who they are, and it changed the perception of America.